The courtroom held its breath. It wasn't just the usual hush that comes with a high-profile trial. It was a heavy, unsettling stillness that settled into the skin of everyone in the room. No rustling papers, no murmuring, no tapping pens. Just silence so thick it seemed to have weight. The fluorescent lights above buzzed faintly, the only sound cutting through the quiet tension. At the center of the courtroom, standing behind her mother's legs, was a little black girl in a yellow dress, white frilly socks, and scuffed pink shoes. Her hair was tied into 2 puffballs, a few curls escaping like they always do when a child plays too much with their hair. She gripped the edge of her mother's coat tightly with one hand, nervous, wide-eyed, then slowly raised her other hand. She pointed right at the police officer sitting on the witness stand. "I know you," she said. The words came out soft, innocent, but they cracked like thunder against the silence. Gasps echoed. A lawyer dropped his pen. One juror covered her mouth. The judge peered over his glasses, brows drawn together in confusion. Even the bailiff took a single step forward, unsure whether to intervene. Courtrooms are built for structure, for control, for order. But nothing in the rules accounts for a 6-year-old girl stopping the world with 4 words. The police officer shifted in his seat, eyes locking on the girl. His jaw tensed. His face, weathered and tired, didn't show fear, but something else flickered there. Surprise, recognition, maybe even regret. The girl's mother, startled, bent down and whispered something, but the child shook her head. The judge cleared his throat. "Young lady," he said gently, his voice steadier than he felt. "Do you know this man?" She nodded. The court reporter's fingers flew across her keyboard. The air felt like it might split open. "He saved me," she said. Just like that, no one moved. One reporter in the back, who'd been scrolling through her notes, froze mid-swipe. A defense attorney blinked like he wasn't sure he'd heard right. Everyone in that room thought they knew the story. This was the trial of Officer Daniel Cross, the man in the viral video, the man who, months ago, had been recorded pinning a young black teenager to the ground outside a gas station. The city erupted, marches, chants, signs raised high. There were tears, speeches, debates, shouting across dinner tables and on television screens. People came to this courtroom expecting one thing: justice or accountability, depending on who you asked. But none of them expected a tiny, trembling voice to turn the whole narrative on its head. The judge spoke again, this time with the careful tone of someone walking across cracking ice. "Miss, may I ask your name?" The girl glanced up at her mother. She nodded slightly. "My name is Nia," she said, barely louder than a whisper. "And you say this officer saved you?" She nodded again, this time more firmly. "When our house was on fire, I was hiding under my bed because I was scared. Mama was outside crying. People were yelling. But he came back. He picked me up and he ran, and the house was hot and everything smelled like smoke." And she stopped, blinking fast, her lips beginning to tremble. The officer was still frozen in place. It's not because he was afraid of being found guilty or not, but because in that moment, someone had cracked open a memory he had buried, not out of shame, but out of pain. It had been a night like too many others, a rough call, a bad neighborhood, a house already in flames when he arrived. People screaming, firefighters shouting. He remembered the woman screaming, "My baby's still inside." He ran in, no body camera footage, no fanfare, just instinct. He found her under the bed, curled up in a ball, coughing. She didn't speak. She didn't cry. She just clung to his neck like she didn't believe he was real, and then he left. Paramedics took her. The fire crews swarmed the scene. He filed the report like he always did and went home. He never learned her name. He didn't expect to see her again until now. The judge looked toward the defense table, then the prosecutor's bench. He seemed to search for something, maybe a sense of control, maybe a sense of direction, but neither was there. Because the truth was, this moment didn't belong to the legal system anymore. It belonged to the girl in the yellow dress. "Miss Naya," the judge said, "can you tell me, how do you know this man saved you?" She looked at the officer again. "'Cause I remember his voice," she said. "He told me to hold on and not let go. And I didn't. And when he took me outside, I looked back at the house, and the roof fell down right where I was. More silence. But this time it was different. Not stunned. Not confused. It was reverent. The mother, clearly overwhelmed, pulled Nia close, hugging her tight and whispering, "It's okay, baby. It's okay now." But the damager, maybe the healing was already done. Something had shifted, not in the facts of the case, but in the hearts of those watching. The prosecutor stood slowly, face unreadable. He didn't interrupt. He didn't object, because what was there to object to? Truth has a way of cutting through everything: rhetoric, evidence, arguments. This little girl had cut through the noise with a single act of honesty. A reporter in the back slipped out of the courtroom, phone in hand. Headlines would be rewritten. Editorials would change tone. Everyone thought they knew who Officer Daniel Cross was. They had seen the video, after all. They had drawn their conclusions, but they didn't know this. They didn't know about the fire, the girl, the rescue. They didn't know Nia. The officer's hands were clasped tightly in his lap. He had taken a beating in the media. He hadn't spoken publicly. He followed the advice of his lawyer: stay quiet. Don't stir the pot. Let the trial speak for you. But this little girl had spoken for him, not to clear his name, not to erase the video or the pain it caused, but to remind the world that no person is ever just one moment. No one is ever just the worst thing they've done or been accused of doing. He blinked. His eyes were misty now, though he tried to hide it. The judge didn't press further. Nia had said enough. The bailiff gently ushered the girl and her mother out of the witness box, guiding them back toward the gallery. As she passed the officer's seat, Nia glanced at him once more. "You're not a bad man," she said. He didn't answer. He couldn't, because in that moment, for the first time in months, someone had seen him not as a villain. Not as a hero, but as a human being. And in a world so quick to label, so desperate to divide, that was enough to leave an entire courtroom speechless. The courtroom felt different now. What had started as a routine trial, another piece of headline, fodder in an already divided city, was no longer just about law or justice. It was about truth and how much of it we allow ourselves to see. The judge called a short recess, giving everyone in the room a moment to breathe, to process what had just happened. But even as people stood, stretched, or whispered to one another, the air still held the weight of Nia's words. Officer Daniel Cross remained seated on the witness stand, motionless. His attorney leaned in and whispered something, but he didn't respond. His eyes were distant, fixed on a memory that now had a face. A little girl in a yellow dress had shaken the very foundation of a case that had been built brick by brick to tear him down. Months before, a grainy cell phone video had exploded across the internet. A black teenager, maybe 16 or 17, was on the ground screaming. Officer Cross was on top of him, restraining him with what some said was excessive force. The crowd in the video shouted. Someone yelled, "Get off him!" The video ended with sirens wailing in the distance and someone crying. Within hours, the video had millions of views. By the end of the week, protesters filled the streets, banners and signs, fists in the air. Social media feeds turned into battlegrounds of hashtags and outrage. Words like racist, abuser, murderer were thrown around with little hesitation. And in the middle of it all was Daniel Cross. Silent, stoic, and hated. He didn't issue a statement. He didn't do interviews. His face appeared on news broadcasts and websites, plastered next to the frozen image of him holding the teen down. The department launched an internal investigation. City officials called for accountability. Some demanded he be fired on the spot, but there was always more to the story. Those who supported him pointed out what the video didn't show. The moments leading up to the incident, suspect resisting arrest, the fact that the teen had a knife that had already injured someone in the crowd. Cross was responding to chaos. It wasn't clean. It wasn't pretty. But it was his job. His split-second decision, caught on a stranger's phone, was now the defining moment of his entire life. Still, no one wanted to hear the details. The video was enough. That one clip became gospel. And Daniel Cross became the villain in a story everyone already thought they understood. And maybe that's why Nia's words hit so hard. Because in the middle of all that noise, all the fire and fury, a 6-year-old had reminded the world that the truth doesn't fit neatly into tweets or headlines. That a man could restrain a suspect 1 month and run into a burning house the next. That humanity doesn't live in absolutes. Back in the courtroom, as the judge resumed the session, something had shifted. The prosecution looked uneasy. They were skilled, seasoned professionals, and their case was strong. They had testimonies, footage, public pressure, but they didn't have Nia. And now, they were no longer just arguing against a man, they were arguing against a story that refused to be simplified. The lead prosecutor stood. He adjusted his tie and approached the witness stand. "Officer Cross," he began, his tone clipped but polite. "Let's return to the incident on March 17th, the day of the arrest in question." Cross nodded slightly. His voice, calm and level, responded, "Yes, sir." "Would you agree that your actions during the arrest were aggressive?" "I would agree they were forceful," Cross said, "but necessary." The prosecutor raised an eyebrow. Necessary, even though the suspect was unarmed? Cross didn't blink. He had dropped the weapon moments before I got to him. Witnesses confirmed he was seen holding a knife. He had already slashed another teenager, was resisting arrest and trying to flee. I did what I was trained to do, subdue him before someone else got hurt. But in the video, Cross interrupted. Carefully but firmly, the video starts after I made contact with him, not before, but during the chase, or when he swung at me. Just the part where it looks the worst. I understand how it looks. I do, but it's not the full story. The room was silent again, not like earlier, when it was stunned by Nia's voice, but now it was contemplative. Listening, considering. People were no longer just looking at a uniform. They were looking at a man fighting to be seen clearly. The prosecutor tried to steer the focus back. "So are you saying the public's reaction to the video was unjustified?" Cross took a breath. "I'm saying the public had a right to be angry, especially if that's all they saw. I'm not mad that people were upset. I'm upset that no one wanted to look further. No one wanted to hear my side." His words weren't defensive. They were weary. The kind of weary that comes after months of being dehumanized, reduced to a freeze frame. Outside the courtroom, public opinion was still a roaring storm. Protesters with signs still marched outside the courthouse. Supporters of Cross held counter-rallies. Tensions simmered. Social media was a battlefield. But inside these walls, something very real was happening. Layers were being peeled back. The defense attorney rose, now taking his turn. "Officer Cross," he said, "let's talk about the fire." Cross shifted. His voice was softer now. "That was 4 months before the arrest. You were off duty?" "Yes. I had just finished a shift, was heading home, when I heard the call on the radio. I wasn't required to respond, but I did." The lawyer nodded. "Tell us what you saw." Crowell stared at the floor for a moment, then spoke. "Smoke everywhere. The firefighters were already there, pulling people out. But the mother, Nia's mother, she was screaming that her daughter was still inside. No one could find her. They thought maybe she'd already gotten out, but she hadn't. I could tell. And what did you do?" "I went in. I don't remember thinking about it. I just remember the heat, the smoke. The house was falling apart. I was crawling through. I saw a little foot sticking out from under a bed. She wasn't crying. She was just hiding." He paused, jaw tight. "She looked at me like she didn't believe I was real. I told her to hold on tight. She did." The defense attorney glanced at the jury. "Did anyone tell you to do that?" "No." "Did you expect recognition? A medal?" Cross laughed. "Bitterly, no. It wasn't about that. It never is." The defense attorney walked away, letting the silence linger. The moment didn't need to be dramatized. It spoke for itself. When court adjourned for the day, people left slowly, their expressions complicated. This wasn't the clear-cut trial they had expected. Some looked frustrated, unsure what to feel. Others looked reflective. Even the reporters had quieted down. Their once sensational headlines now struggling to keep up with a story far more nuanced than expected. Cross walked out the side exit, surrounded by his legal team, but his eyes scanned the sidewalk. Across the street, behind a barricade, Nia stood holding her mother's hand. She waved. He stopped, lifted a hand, and waved back. Not a grand gesture. Not a statement. Just a moment. For months, he had been a villain, a symbol, a target. But today, because of one little girl's voice, he had become a person again, and that changes everything. The tension in the courtroom didn't fade, it matured. After the recess, after Nia's unexpected testimony, and Officer Cross's quiet vulnerability, something had changed, not in the case itself, but in the atmosphere, in the people. The courtroom was still filled with reporters, spectators, and the kind of silent watchers who show up to trials for reasons they don't fully understand. But now, there was a shared understanding. They weren't just witnessing a trial. They were watching something human unfold. The judge sat higher in his chair now, not because he was more powerful, but because he was trying to keep the balance. This wasn't just about law anymore. It was about truth, dignity, and perspective. Glance at the jury. Ordinary people called to do an extraordinary thing. Their faces were mixed with confusion and empathy, responsibility and doubt. As the final arguments neared, the courtroom swelled with the anticipation of an ending that no one could predict anymore. Officer Daniel Cross remained seated for questioning. The judge allowed an unusual moment of direct examination, a clarification. The defense lawyer stood, hands clasped behind his back. "Officer Cross," said, voice steady but soft, "what does all of this, everything we've heard, mean to you?" Cross paused. That wasn't a legal question. It wasn't a trap or a trick. It was personal. "It means that sometimes the truth doesn't scream," he said. "Sometimes it whispers, and no one hears it because the shouting is too loud." There was no objection. The courtroom was still. Cross continued. "I became a police officer because I believed I could make things better. I believed that helping just one person could justify the risk. But lately he stopped." His throat moved as he swallowed the next words. "Lately it's felt like none of that matters. No one wants to believe in the good anymore. That one mistake, one moment taken out of context, erases a lifetime of doing the right thing." No one moved. Even the bailiff stood completely still. "I'm not asking anyone to forget what happened in that video," he said, eyes scanning the room. "What I'm asking is that you remember what came before at hand, what came after. I didn't do everything. Right, I'm not perfect, but I'm not the monster people turned me into." He looked down at his hands. "I saved a little girl because she deserved to live. That wasn't duty. That was humanity." There it was, again the reminder that this wasn't about guilt or innocence alone. It was about complexity, about the danger of reducing people to headlines, about the fact that justice and mercy sometimes need to share the same space. When he finished speaking, the judge nodded silently, not an endorsement, not an agreement, but an acknowledgement of the weight of his words. The prosecution rested. The defense rested. Closing arguments were brief, less fiery than expected, more careful. Everyone could feel that the usual tactics wouldn't work anymore. The jury needed space to think, not to be convinced. Hours later, after deliberation, the jury filed back in. Their faces were unreadable. A few looked tired. One man's hands shook as he folded the verdict slip and handed it to the bailiff, who then passed it to the judge. The judge opened it. His eyes scanned the words. Then he looked at the defendant. "Will the defendant please rise?" Daniel Cross stood. The judge cleared his throat and read, "In the matter of Officer Daniel Cross, on the charge of excessive use of force, we the jury find the defendant." He paused, just briefly. "Not guilty." The courtroom didn't erupt. It didn't cheer or cry. It breathed. A single, long, quiet breath. No applause, no shouting. Just silence followed by the sound of Nia's soft voice from the back of the gallery. "He's not a bad man," she whispered again, as if the world needed to hear it twice. Some people left quietly. Others lingered. There was no celebration, no victory lap, just the kind of strange stillness that follows a wave after it crashes. Officer Cross sat down slowly. He didn't smile. He didn't cry. Just sat, his face unreadable. Relief, maybe. Exhaustion, definitely. The prosecutor approached him quietly, extending a hand. "I don't agree with everything you did," he said, "but I understand more now than I did before." Cross nodded, accepting the handshake. "That's all I ever wanted," he replied. Outside the courthouse, media vans lit up, cameras rolling, reporters scrambling to rewrite their narratives. Protesters lowered their signs, unsure of whether to chant or go home. Supporters blinked, unsure whether they had won anything at all. One sign was left behind on the steps. It read in bold red letters, "No justice, no justice, no peace." But beneath it, written in pen, as if added by someone else, were the words, "But maybe, just maybe, grace." Cross walked out the side door again. This time he didn't look for Naya. He didn't expect her to be there, but she was. Sitting on the courthouse bench with her mother, legs swinging, yellow dress wrinkled now from the long day. She looked up, and this time she didn't wave. She stood and ran toward him before he could say anything. She hugged his legs, burying her face into the side of his uniform. Cross stood frozen. Slowly, he bent down to her level. "Thank you," she whispered. He shook his head. "No, thank you." Her mother walked over, tears in her eyes. "I didn't want her to come. I was scared of what people would say, what they'd do. But she wouldn't stop. She kept saying he's not what they think he is." Cross didn't know what to say, so he said nothing. Sometimes silence is the only language deep enough for moments like that. Later that evening, back in his apartment, Cross took off his badge and placed it on the kitchen table. He stared at it for a long time. It wasn't the symbol it used to be. It was heavier now, not because of shame, but because of the weight of perspective. Because it now held within it not just the authority of the law, but the fragility of perception. It's the complexity of being human. He picked up his phone and saw dozens of missed calls, hundreds of messages. Most he ignored. But one caught his. It was a video. Someone had recorded Nia's moment in court. Her little voice, her pointed finger. Her story, it was already going viral, but this time, it wasn't outrage spreading across screens. It was empathy. The caption read, "A little. Girl changed the courtroom. Not with evidence, not with law, but with the truth only a child can tell." And in the comments below, strangers wrote things he never thought he'd see. "I judged him too fast. Maybe we don't always know the full story." Crying. "This is what humanity looks like. Grace. We need more grace." Cross closed the app and sat in silence. A different kind of silence now. One not filled with fear or tension or accusations, but peace. And though he knew the world would move on, and though he knew his life would never return to what it was before, he also knew something else. He had been seen. Fully. Not as a headline. Not as a villain. Not even as a hero. But as a man who tried. And sometimes, in a world that demands perfection, but offers none, that is enough.